You hit a time in your early teens when exploration is required and healthy. It's a calling of sorts that you might not notice at the time, and I certainly didn't notice at the time. I must have been... No, I know for a fact I was 14 because I remember Snake Eater had just come out. Man, 2004 was a great year for games. So I had known how to ride a bike since I was like 8, but I never really cared to own one. But a group of guys I'd known suddenly took a liking to me. I was hesitant to befriend them at first. I had friends and I wasn't a social reject or anything, but it was a very sudden befriending. Getting to know them, they seemed to have common interests with me, mostly video games. They were Sony fans more specifically. But they also liked biking, so I said, okay, why not? I'll save up a little allowance and go in for a decent bike. Until then, Jack let me borrow his old bike, a heavy and sky blue bike without any gears. Jack was who I perceived to be the de facto leader of the group until I truly got into the circle. He was a square-jawed but scrawny fellow with a pair of glasses for every day of the week. His parents did well, and he was rather personable. He called the clique, the Marshmallow Family. He said that he'd explain the name one day, but that it's a long story, so he'll hold off for now. Then there was Grant and Desmond, twin brothers that looked exactly alike. I remember those names vividly because who doesn't theme the name of their twins? Anyway, the only outstanding thing about them was their obsession with Pokemon. Everyone was tired of hearing about Fire Red and Leaf Green, but Pokemon did a nice job of marketing to that twin demographic, you know? Who was holding what color of Game Boy Advance was the only way that we could tell them apart. There was George, who liked anime, which I had a growing interest in at the time, but he cared about it a lot more than I did. He was also the only athletically gifted one in the clique. Pudgy, but a star football player. Odd combo, anime and star football player, but... Lastly, there was Sarah. Everyone liked her. Liked her. I did too, but, I didn't want to be with her. All the boys fawned after her because she was a girl that liked video games. Jack, who was quite the looker, was constantly shooting for her approval by shit-talking about other girls from school. Grant and Desmond would get upset when she confused them for each other. George would do stupid tricks on his bike for her amusement. It was all so immature and transparent. Ugh. Once, we biked to a playground we hadn't hung out at before after visiting a convenience store, and Sarah pulled out like a dozen Snicker bars out of her backpack. More than that, even. I always had a thing against stealing. It just pisses me off. So I confronted her about it. She said nothing in response, but the boys had words for me. It was raining when we got to the playground, and we took shelter in the picnic area. I didn't want to bike home in the rain, so I just had to sit there uncomfortable. Despite Jack telling me not to worry about it and just forget that it happened. That day, I began to feel I didn't have the whole story about these guys. It was just a hunch, but I didn't want to believe that they were that brainwashed by hormones in this girl. The next day, I was reluctant to go out biking with them, but Jack reiterated to just forget what happened. Ultimately, I agreed, and we rode off to some water filtration place, and it had a strange sloping parking lot. The talk of how shitty Halo was ended when we got to the back of the parking lot, out of plain view. Grant and Desmond tackled me to the ground and held me down. Then George pulled out 3 things of soap and socks. George, Jack, and Sarah beat me repeatedly by swinging them into my gut. They didn't do it long, just long enough to send a message. Before letting me go, Sarah said that if I didn't tell anyone about this, that I could fuck her. With that, Grant and Desmond let me go, and the Marshmallow family rode off together. I went home and slept. I called in school the next day, a Friday. I told my mom I had a stomachache. I stayed in my room and napped as much as I possibly could, but I slept so much that I couldn't pass out anymore. I had no intention of fucking Sarah, but I didn't tell anyone what had happened out of fear of the stick. The reward, the carrot, was meaningless, and it was a crazy thing to say after beating someone so mercilessly. Jack showed up at my bedroom window Saturday night. Hesitantly, I opened the window. He said I could do Sarah if I'd like to, but that it would be a commitment. I made the excuse that Jack's bike that I borrowed was in the garage and that it was past my curfew. In fact, it was past all of our curfews. He said that I could ride on the back of his bike. It didn't sound like an offer. It sounded like an order. I hopped on the bike, afraid of the alternatives. Taking back roads and taking advantage of shadows, Jack rode us to a big boiler-looking thing behind a fence. Everyone was there. He said, "This is the Marshmallow, Quinn. This is where we go most nights." George pulled a blanket out of his backpack and put it over the barbed fence. We climbed over the fence, and I smelled something truly terrible. It was not unlike earwax, but concentrated. It didn't make me retch. It made it hard to breathe. It felt like I was being starved of oxygen, like my lungs were being flattened into pancakes. It, no joke, traumatized me. Anything that takes hair from me gives me a panic attack now. Sarah took me around the building beside the Marshmallow, and there it was. Sarah introduced it as the beat. I hesitate to describe what it was. To start, it was like a baby, but where its feet should have been was a pile of sludge. A mixture of shit, throw up, and bodily fluids I couldn't possibly account for. This amalgamation of things solidified into the cement which oxidized around this thing's presence. Its skin was bee-red in the direction that it faced where the sun would be in the morning, but the color of vanilla ice cream on the side facing the back of the building. It was smaller than a baby, and its eyes were shut. Its arms seemed to have atrophied into a crisp, and its mouth had lips swollen to easily 3 times the size that you would expect, with a jaw that hung lower than you would expect, and a gape. Below the cement ledge this abomination was perched on was a dripping fungal puddle thing that was in the process of breaking down ink on wrappers and packages of various snack foods. After spotting the Doritos and Snicker wrappers in this puddle, I noticed them fading into the pile of the thing itself. Amidst my shuddering and introspection on life, George has started face-to-face fucking Sarah, standing up against the Marshmallow with one of her legs over his shoulder. Meanwhile, the twins furiously jerked it beside them, and Jack opened up a pack of Twizzlers. He fed them to this awful thing a handful at a time. One of the twins, I'm not sure which, they were both nude. He proclaimed he was coming, and George quickly pulled out of Sarah, and Sarah made way for said twin. Jack reprimanded this twin, saying that I should have been the one to come first since I was new to the family. Sarah then came over, cum running down her leg, and started undressing me. I was afraid to move. I was stiff and shaking. She started blowing me. I closed my eyes and tried to tell myself I was dreaming. But as I did so, I realized that it didn't matter. Because the thoughts and the images would remain in my head, even if I woke up from this. I prayed it was all a dream I'd forget upon waking up. Those were high hopes. I heard shuffling around me and a voice whispered in my ear, "Come for her." She stopped sucking and laid down. I looked at her cum-filled vagina. They had all done it. I was stuck. It felt gross. I didn't sleep that night. I opened my garage door and biked out quickly at 5 a.m. before my parents could react to the door opening sound. I used the money I had saved up to purchase a shovel at the Lowe's near the Marshmallow. As I cocked back the shovel, the thing opened its eyes. They were milky yellow. I don't regret that swing I took at its soft head, but it's the worst thing I've ever done. Skipping ahead, I drank 3/4 of a bottle of Myers rum from my parents' cabinet and played Spyro the Dragon to comfort myself as much as possible. When my parents got home from the police department, after trying to file a missing persons report, I quickly slit my wrist. The attention getting way, not the ending it all way. I knew that it'd get me the help that I needed. It's been 10 years since all of this happened, and honestly, while I've made progress, I'm not over it, I know that. It hurts to talk about it, but this is nonetheless therapy for me. If you're wondering what happened to the Marshmallow family, they all but disappeared. George showed up at my house when I was receiving treatment for my wrist and, my head. He was arrested for breaking and entering. But after that, him and his bike disappeared. Desmond wound up dead where I was beaten with the socks. Draw what conclusions you will from this. But the conclusions I've drawn from this is that sex and suffering are the same thing to me.